Today's episode is sponsored by Select Savory Seasonings. Have you ever noticed that most barbecue rubs on the market use sugar as the first or second ingredient? Worry no longer. With Select Savory Seasonings, they offer fresh, gourmet, small batch, sugar-free and additive-free seasonings and spices to help you make good, tasty food that is good for you so that you can lose weight, get healthy, and feel amazing. Check them out today at selectsavory.com and use coupon code PODCAST to receive 15% off your first order.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Simple Low Carb Lifestyle Podcast. Today we have the wonderful Carrie Brown with us today. Carrie's got an interesting story as to why she is low carb and keto, and has absolutely nothing to do with weight loss. But before we get into that, thanks for being here today.
Hi, Corey. Thanks for having me. It's always I love talking about the benefits of keto that I have personally found in my life.
And let's just start with that. What was it that got you to say, hey, wait a minute, this might be something that's going to benefit me, and as we will find out here, for my mental health, and we'll go from there.
So it was actually Dr. Ted Naiman, who I think most people in the keto world have heard of, or if you haven't, you will soon. It was actually Dr. Ted Naiman that said, I think you should try keto. And the way that happened was I would say I had spent my entire life being depressed. I kind of was born depressed, and I didn't know any different. But of course, when you grow up with something, that's just your normal. Right. So it was a while before I started to figure out that there was something that wasn't quite right with me, because I was always in trouble. I was always being told off. I was always being told to cheer up. And I'm just like, hey, this is
not cheered up.
like I don't know what you're saying. And so I figured out from quite an early age that there was something that wasn't quite right about me, and that wasn't acceptable about me. But when you're that young and you don't have the language and you don't understand what it is, that can be really, really difficult and confusing. As I got older, I realized, and I started seeing a therapist when I was, I want to say 19, that I actually kind of got a label for it, that I actually could like hang my hat on. Okay, this isn't normal, but you're suffering from depression. And, so there was this perpetual like black cloud hanging over me that I didn't understand and I didn't really recognize until I was in my late teens. But that all made for a fairly miserable childhood. So when I was 19, I started trying to figure out what the depression was and why I felt the way I did. And it's been a long and convoluted story. But in 2013, after having tried various antidepressants over the years, I'd been hospitalized, I'd been diagnosed with unipolar depression, and had various medications, none of which had been successful, all of which had given me different horrible side effects. And after a lot of years of that, I just decided, I'm broken. It's just the way I am. I can't fix it. I've been in therapy. I've seen psychotherapy. I've done it all. So I just realized that I was just going to have to fake my way through life, because if you show up at work in a depressive state, that's a fairly career limiting move. Friendships, relationships, everything, right? So when I was in public, I would kind of, fake my way. I would force myself to behave in a way that other people felt was acceptable. And then when I was at home on my own, I would mostly self-medicate with alcohol.
Okay.
Because it was very painful. And I felt, that I was living a fake life, and I didn't feel like I could be me. Right. Because of this depression that nobody seemed to be able to fix, that none of the medications helped. In fact, they created more problems than they solved.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided I was just going to have to fake my way through. And that's what I did for a lot of years, very successfully. Nobody at work knew. In fact, I don't think anybody in my life ever recognized that I had depression. Nobody knew.
Mm-hmm.
And being an introvert, I spend a lot of time on my own, and I only have a few close friends anyway, but even they didn't know. Nobody
Right.
knew I had depression.
Mm-hmm.
That's the level of like, you know, faking it that I'd built up to just to get through life.
Right.
But in 2013, I actually had a mental break that ended me up under armed guard at the hospital. I was living in Washington State at the time, and I discovered that suicide is illegal in Washington State.
It's the one crime, if you actually commit, they can't arrest you for.
Right.
If you're successful.
That just amuses me, but
Yep.
yeah, suicide is illegal. So what that actually means in reality is if somebody in authority who has some power hears from someone else or from you that you are planning on killing yourself, then they have the authority to intervene and do whatever to stop you, because you are in the act of wanting to is like an illegal act. So anyway, the police came and got me, and off I went to the hospital. And there followed the worst 9 hours of my life. And I actually I really had to fight to get out of there, because one of the things I didn't realize until I got there was that the state, certainly in Washington, have the right to put you on a 14-day involuntary hold. So it was like going, you know, they had the authority to essentially put me in jail for 14 days.
For 2 weeks, yep.
And now I don't know what it is in any other state. I'm just familiar with Washington because that's where I was living. But I was single. I'd been single for a long time. Single, bunch of cats, not many close friends, just because I'm an introvert and, you know, crowds aren't my thing. And so I'm lying in the hospital, and I realized that if I didn't talk my way out of being committed, the technical term for when they, you know, lock you up, my life was just going to fall apart, because I wouldn't have shown up at work. So I almost certainly would have lost my job. Of course, when they took me to the hospital, I had nothing. I didn't have my medications, which were keeping me somewhat okay. Nobody knew I was there. I didn't have my cell phone or any means of contacting anyone, and who knows anybody's phone number now. There was nobody I could call. Nobody knew I was there. And so I was in this really kind of untenable situation. So what would have happened if they'd have committed me was that everything would have gone to hell in a handbasket.
You would have disappeared for 2 weeks.
Right.
And nobody would have known.
Right. My cats would all be dead. You can imagine the ramifications of that given my living situation. And so, and of course I was the only income earner because I was the only one. So no job, no like house payments, like, you know, everything. And so I remember lying in the hospital and going, okay, there's a process in Washington where once the social worker at the hospital assesses you, if he determines that this is becoming an involuntary committal, then he or she cannot sign those papers. Somebody called the county assessor has to come and do an evaluation before they can legally hold you. Luckily for me, this happened late on a Thursday night, and the assessor could not get, I don't think they called her till like 11 o'clock at night.
Right.
She couldn't get to me for like 5 hours. So I had 5 hours to kind of
straighten yourself up.
talk myself into a state where I could get myself out of being committed. And so Oscar-worthy performance that night, I actually managed to persuade her that, you know, I would organize friends to stay with me. I would, you know, and I would see my therapist, and I had to agree to certain things. One was that somebody had to be with me, and that I had to have a psychiatric evaluation, and there was a bunch of stuff. She said, I'm going to let you out, but there's some conditions.
Right.
So I did manage to get out of being committed. But there followed, after that event, there followed like this merry-go-round of psychiatrists and testing and doctors and medications, and it was their role in life was, one, to give me a diagnosis or a label, and two, to find whatever medication they could that would keep me stable enough to stop me hurting myself or someone else. Not that I've ever been violent, but that's their remit. And so that was the point at which I was diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder, which, for people who don't understand the different forms of bipolar 1 is where you have two phases. You have the depressive phase and the manic phase. The manic being crazy, happy, like think you're Superwoman, Superman. So bipolar 1 disorder is where you're mostly manic and have much longer, more intense manic episodes punctuated by shorter, less intense depressive episodes. Those are the people that you typically hear about on the news, because they drove 120 in a 30. They decided they could fly and jumped off a building, not intending to commit suicide. They spent $50,000 in a weekend of money they didn't have. Like, they slept with everything that stood still long enough. So that's
it's almost like happy-go-lucky.
Right. That's the mania. That's not me. I have bipolar 2 disorder, which is long, very intense depressive episodes punctuated by short bursts of not mania, but what they call hypomania. Now, for me, hypomania looked like writing a cookbook in 5 weeks. Being able to I was just unbelievably focused and able to turn out a massive amount of work. I was just 4 hours sleep. I was like Superwoman, but in a controlled, productive way, as opposed to the mania, which is like the crazy way. So I'm actually thankful that I'm bipolar 2 and not bipolar 1. I wouldn't have liked to have seen me had I had bipolar 1. Anyway, so the hypermanic parts, actually, I loved those because I got a ton done.
Yep.
So anyway, that was the point at which I was diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder. And that actually explained a lot in terms of why none of the medications I had previously in my life for depression had worked. Because if you give a bipolar person an antidepressant designed for unipolar depression, bad things happen. And I can attest to that, because everyone they put me on had a really unfortunate side effect.
Right.
So that I had been misdiagnosed all the way up to 2013 when they finally said, no, this is bipolar. So then, once they'd made the diagnosis, they started the pill testing. So they put me on a medication, and I was a complete zombie for 2 weeks, which is not. If you're the only person paying the bills,
you got to kind of work.
I got to work. So I did that for 2 weeks, and then I said, I can't. I have to support myself. I have to work. I'm not disabled. Like, get me off this. So then I don't remember how many we tried, but eventually we found one that got me to the place where I felt like I could still perform to my normal level at work, but I wasn't a danger to anybody.
Sure.
And so they kind of got me stabilized, but there were a lot of side effects. Most of them were, they weren't crazy, but they weren't pleasant. Like I would forget words. I would just forget words all the time. I mean, everybody just like forgets, you know, a name or something every once in a while. For me, it was like all the time. I was just forgetting words, and I gained weight, and I don't remember the other things, but there was a lot of really annoying little side effects.
Sure.
But I was required to have psychiatric care. I had to go see the psychiatrist every week, and I had to be medicated. So I did all that, but after 9 months, I became suicidal again. Despite the fact that I was on the medication, I became suicidal, and I actually had to take a leave of absence from work. I was actually off work for 3 months. And at the end of that time, I had to go back to work because I had to go back to work.
Yeah.
But that was the point at which I was like, every week I would go to the psychiatrist, you know, at $300 a pop for half an hour, and I was required to do it. So, you know, you go, but it turned out, and I'm a very deep thinker. I think all the time about all sorts of things. So I would go away and I would think about things all week, and then I would go back to my next psychotherapy session, and I was psychiatrist session, and I would say, hey, I've been thinking about this, you know, and I'd be thinking about something like a symptom or something that had happened, or, you know, something in my family. And I would be thinking, and I'd go, hey, I've been thinking about this. What do you think about that? And my psychiatrist would go, hey, that's a great idea. We'll try that. And then the next week I would come in and say, hey, I was thinking about this. And he'd go, that's a great idea. Let's try that. And like after a couple of months of this, I was like, wait,
I'll just try it on my own.
I'm showing up every week, paying you $300 for you to agree with my diagnosis or my ideas. Like, this is BS, man. Like, and I was also suicidal. I was suicidal 24/7 for 8 months straight. 3 of those months I was allowed to be suicidal at home on my own, but then I had to go back to work, and trying the emotional exhaustion of trying to work and behave in a way that is appropriate to the workplace, while your brain is trying to kill you, is just exhausting. It's just so draining. And again, you're in that situation where I'm like faking it. I'm like forcing my voice, my face to look how it should, and you know, the energy, and forcing myself to do stuff because I've got bills to pay, and just like dragging myself through life because I didn't know what else to do. And I've spent all this money on this psychiatric care, and I'm popping all these pills, and I'm still in this really difficult situation. So that was pretty much at the point where I decided to fire everybody, because I was like, they're not helping me. Like, I'm coming up with all the suggestions here, but also, if I'm going to be suicidal, I'll be suicidal without taking the pills.
And the extra side effects that are coming from those. Right.
I'd rather, if I'm going to be suicidal either way, then I'll just stop taking the pills. And so I did. I fired everybody, and I fired my psychiatrist, took myself off my medication. But about 3 months after that, like, it was just like, I just couldn't. I was just so exhausted from just struggling, and mentally and emotionally and physically, and work, and, you know, my brain's trying to kill me all this time. And so I went to see another doctor, and he put me on a anti-seizure medication, and that's important, called lamotrigine. And I started taking it, and 3 days later, it was like someone had turned the lights on.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like I had joy for probably the first time in my life. It was magical. And so that went on for 6 months. And then one day, about 6 months later, I became suicidal again, just like that.
Like that.
And their response to that was to double the dose of the lamotrigine.
Right.
So we doubled the dose, and, you know, the lights went back on, the joy came back. 6 months later, the lights went off. I'm suicidal again. And that was at the point where I really went, this is BS, people. I can't spend the rest of my life, one, waiting for the shoe to drop, because the shoe might drop when I'm in a really vulnerable position and I might do something that I can't come back from.
Right.
And two, you're just giving me increasing amounts of this brain altering chemical.
Yep.
We can't do this every 6 months. Like,
you're gonna have diminishing returns. You're gonna get so far you can't double it anymore.
Right. So I'm just like, I am going to find out why I have bipolar 2 disorder, because that was what was really bugging me by that point, was that I'd had all this psychiatric care. I'd had all these drugs. I was in psychotherapy, and nobody was asking the critical question, which is, why does Carrie have bipolar? I'm like, maybe if we find out why, because there's a reason, right? I mean, bipolar is not a thing. Bipolar is a collection of symptoms that they have put a label on because it makes it easier for them to categorize us and organize us and figure out how to medicate us. So it's a collection of symptoms. So nobody's even asking what's causing those symptoms.
Right.
Why does Carrie have bipolar? Nobody was asking that.
They weren't looking for the root cause.
Right. So I'm going, call me crazy, but maybe if we figure out why I have bipolar, what's causing it, maybe we could stop it. I don't know. I mean,
call me crazy, right?
Call me crazy, but like, this makes sense to me.
Yep.
And so I fired everybody then.
Yeah.
Everybody was gone. No drugs. No, actually, I stayed on the lamotrigine.
Okay.
I did double the dose, but I stayed on it because I needed my brain so that I could figure this out. I said, I'm going to figure out why I'm bipolar. And I looked at all the possibilities. There's environment, there's food, there's emotional environment, how you grew up. And of course, then there's genetics. And so when I looked at all what in my mind were the possibilities for why I had bipolar, or any collection of those, the one that seemed most definitive was your DNA, because your DNA is your DNA. I thought, so I'll start there and I'll see if there's anything there. And if there's not, then I'll start, because, when you start looking at food, like the testing and like it could be a million things, and environment. So I thought I'll knock out the big one first. So I spat into a tube, got my DNA report back. And at the same time, I did allergy. So I had 1 million blood tests testing me what was in my blood that shouldn't have been, what wasn't in my blood that should have been, like toxic levels of chemicals, everything you can think of. I was tested. I had environmental allergy testing, I had chemical allergy testing, I had food allergy testing, I spent days giving blood or having blood removed so got my DNA sent off for all these blood tests. And it was around the same time when I got my DNA back that Dr. Ted Naiman started following me on Twitter.
Okay.
And I was like, I always, whenever a doctor follows me on Twitter, I'm like, what? Why are they following me?
Yep.
So anyway, we got into a conversation. He actually wrote the foreword for my 101 Keto Beverages cookbook.
Okay.
And then, so we published this book together, and then I pinged him one day and I said, we should probably meet. We wrote a book together. We should probably meet, don't you think? And his practice was 11 miles from my home.
Okay.
So we met, and we were talking about, I told him about my bipolar, and I said, I'm happy. I'll make an appointment. I'm not trying to get a free visit here.
Yeah.
I'll make an appointment. We're sitting in a Starbucks having coffee, and I'm like, I'll make an appointment. I don't want a free free session. But can you read DNA? I mean, do you DNA reports? Can you, because the thing they send you is like gobbledygook.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm not really, but I'm going to have a look at it. So he said, why? And I told him I had bipolar, and he just said, oh, I can help you with that. I'm like, okay. So I made an appointment and I went to see him. And he was the one that said, you're on lamotrigine, which is an anti-seizure medication. Now, the ketogenic diet was originally developed to help children who had seizures.
Yep.
And it was very, very, very successful in eradicating or majorly helping children with seizures. So his thinking was, if you're on an anti-seizure medication and it's helping, maybe the diet that has helped so many children with seizures, maybe that will help you. So I stayed on the lamotrigine because I was frankly terrified to come off it.
Yeah.
And I certainly wasn't going to do it on my own, but he was the one that put me on keto, and it was hardcore keto. It was, and I know for most people who were on keto for weight loss, we're like, you don't have to have purple pea sticks. Like, you just have to be in ketosis. It doesn't have to be like ketosis is enough. But that, because we were doing it for my brain, it was like super hardcore.
You needed
keto.
the therapeutic level because of it.
Right. Our goal was for me to make those pea sticks as purple as possible.
Yep.
So it was hardcore. So then I got a naturopath, because Ted, doesn't do all the food allergies and all that kind of stuff. So I got a naturopath. She went over my DNA and went over all of the blood tests. So we found out that I was allergic to or sensitive to so many foodstuffs. It was just, it was crazy. So we took all those out, and then we laid keto over what was left. And it actually left me with 9 foods that I could eat.
Okay.
And so I ate, and of course the added thing is that if you're on if your food is limited, you have to rotate. So you have to rotate things every 4 days. Because if you eat foods too much too often, you can actually develop a sensitivity to them. So I had 9 things that I could eat, and I had to rotate them over a 4-day period. So I just made this spreadsheet, which was like, whatever it was, bison, lamb, duck. I don't even remember what the 9 things were now, but I know bison, 3 of them. Thank goodness. All the yummy things. So I had this spreadsheet, which basically had all 9 things and then rotated over then 3 meals a day over 4 days. And that's what I ate for 3 months. So we did that. And then the other thing, and really the jackpot for me, was my DNA, was that we discovered that I have a genetic wrinkle called MTHFR, which means, it means a lot of things, but one of the things it means is that I have a very reduced ability to methylate.
Right.
Now, methylation is a process that happens. There's lots of methylation that is required that goes on in your body. So if you're not able to methylate, or not able to methylate very well, it can mean things like our livers are not very good at detoxing. So we tend to be very sensitive to toxins because we can't get rid of them, or because we can't get rid of them, our toxic load tends to build up and up and up, which is why a lot of us are chronically ill with things that nobody knows what they are.
Okay.
Because the toxins are not being cleared from the body because we're not able to methylate.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one thing. But the big thing is that B vitamins in their normal form, as they come in food,
Mm-hmm.
we can't, nobody, you, me, nobody can use them. B vitamins have to be processed before the body can use them, and the process they use for that is methylation. So it was, I had pretty much, because I can't methylate,
Mm-hmm.
I had pretty much had a lifelong deficiency of B vitamins, and actually all the blood tests that I'd had at the same
Right.
time, you just looked at it. Everything that should have been in my blood that wasn't, there was no B vitamins. I had a severe deficiency in all the B vitamins, which was kind of like, whoa. And then, of course, we realized that it didn't matter how many B vitamins I take.
It just went right
food.
back out because you couldn't process it.
I can't use it.
Yep.
So we had all these, so we put me on the 9 foods on rotation. We also put me on, because you can get B vitamins that are pre-methylated.
Right.
So I started taking pre-methylated B vitamins, and 6 weeks, immediately within 5, or on day 5, I had that year. So this was in September. I had that year a headache every afternoon for 8 months.
Just, you knew it was there. You just
Every
expected
afternoon.
it. Yep.
Every day it came. So I was taking painkillers every day. So we started the food rotation with taking all the food intolerances out. We started the methylated B vitamins. We also started some other detox stuff because I couldn't do it, so helping me to do that. Day 5, I didn't have a headache for the first time that year. So that was on September the 5th. And middle of October, so 6 weeks later, by that point, I'd been on keto for 3 months. I'd been on the methylated Bs and the food intolerance things for 6 weeks. And I saw Dr. Naiman in the middle of October. The difference in my blood between July, when I first saw him, in October was like extraordinary. I was pre-diabetic, which I had no idea I was. I was pre-diabetic. Right. I was like, I think my A1C was 4.6 when I saw him in October, which is like perfect. Amazing.
Yep.
So the difference in my blood was staggering. But after the 3 months keto, 6 weeks on the methylated Bs, he said, you can stop the lamotrigine. And I'm like, too scared to do that. He said, okay, you can, but okay. So we half-lifed it, and then, we'd wait a few days and then half and then half. And so over the course of about a week or 10 days, I stopped taking my lamotrigine. That was pretty much, it's probably around my 5th anniversary right now, the end of October 2020. So the net of all of this is that I have been completely unmedicated for the last 5 years, and I've had 0 symptoms of bipolar for the last 5 years.
That's amazing.
So that was a very long story.
Yeah.
But that's the bottom line, is that, so I would say that I have cured my bipolar. But of course, bipolar is not really a thing. It's just a label. What I mean when I say I've cured bipolar is I no longer have any symptoms that are labeled bipolar. So do I have bipolar now? No, I don't.
Yeah.
So there's hundreds of, there's thousands and tens of thousands of doctors and psychiatrists and psychotherapists who will say that bipolar is incurable, but 5 years symptom-free, I would beg to differ.
I would too. It's just same as those doctors that say that you can never cure diabetes either.
Yeah.
And yet we know that's not the case.
Yeah.
So
maybe reverse is the best word, but
it might be.
Whatever. I no longer, if I ever have to fill in any medical forms, I no longer say bipolar, or because it's been 5 years. Like it actually feels dishonest now to say.
Yep.
So it's not.
It's not a part of you anymore, basically.
No.
So,
although I'm sure there's some people that might think I'm still bipolar. Oh, I say that jokingly.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna say we'll leave that alone. So I guess I was thinking, what's the difference then? I mean, between then and now. Obviously you're working on your own more so, but like you said, you had to fight to actually just look normal back then as compared to now. So what are those differences now for you?
It took a long time, and there are still, I would say, there's still some days where I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. There's still, it's still miraculous to me when, because like at the beginning, I said I was born depressed. To not think that way anymore.
Right.
I mean, I just do not think the way that I did up to that point. And I can be an awkward cuss, and I'm very stubborn. And I have tried to make myself depressed.
Right.
And I can't.
Okay.
I've tried to emulate the crazy, but I can't. I simply don't think that way anymore.
Right.
And that is really odd. And it was far harder to embrace and accept than you might think.
Well, I actually, no, I'm not surprised in that, because when you've lived your whole life one way and it's changed, now it's completely different. You're still, there's that habit that's been built up. You're expecting it to happen. It's the same with, me being overweight most of my life. There's still that in the back of my mind of, well, I'm not, the obese person I used to be, but you're still waiting to give in my case, and go back to eating the garbage I used to. Or friends of mine that, it's like the way that they were raised and the way that they're being treated now is completely different, but they still revert back to, the way things used to be. It's like, well, hold on a second. Let's take a look at this here. And it's like, oh yeah, you're right. That's not the way things are now. So it's not a surprise that, after only 5 years compared to the rest of your, prior lifetime, that it's still that odd feeling, for lack of better words.
It was also, and I was really, because I'd been in therapy for so long, for like 10 years. And so I'm very, very self-aware. I've like turned every rock and, peeled back endless layers of onion. And so I'm very self-aware. I'm very aware of my own failings. But even having that awareness, I was shocked at about a month after I came off the lamotrigine, and I went to see my therapist, and I became aware that there was a little bit of me, and it was only a little bit, but there was a little bit of me that was like, I don't have bipolar anymore. Like it was, my identity was a little bit like lost, a little bit like, but
that is me, and yet it's not anymore.
Right. I couldn't identify. I was like, it was like a piece of me had been lost. And for a minute there, but of course I had this therapist that I've been seeing for 10 years. So I had someone to kind of, talk this out with, someone who was sane and could see it from a different perspective.
Sure.
And of course he knows me better, literally better than anybody on earth. So, and I was kind of like, I felt like I'd lost part of myself because my identity for so long had been having this mental illness or having bipolar, and there was always this, well, that's because I'm bipolar, or I'm bipolar, that's why I think this way there, and suddenly that rack was, I couldn't
Yep.
hang my hat on that anymore because it wasn't there.
Yeah.
And that was surprisingly, that really caught me off guard because I
Mhm.
wasn't expecting that. You think, and I talk about this because I think it's really important.
Mhm.
Whatever it is that's bad that you're trying to eliminate, just
Yes.
be aware that when you've eliminated it, you might actually have a
Yep.
bit of a struggle letting it go, because whatever it is, be it, you know, being overweight,
Yep.
having cancer, having a mental illness, like whatever it is, I want people to just be aware of maybe a little bit of their psyche being trying to hang on to it, because it's like you're losing part of your identity when you're no longer ill.
Yep.
When you no longer have this reason why XYZ, when you can't like use that anymore.
Right.
It was like super weird for me, and I did have a little bit, not a lot, but just a little bit of a struggle with that. And I did, my therapist and I did kind of talk about that, and he helped me through that. I wasn't, you know, even things like cancer, I think, or, you know, a couple of years ago, I had Lyme disease.
Yep.
And I see this a lot in Lyme communities, that some people have had Lyme for so long, they've been ill for so long, they've been on disability for so long. And a lot of people may scream at me for this, but I absolutely believe, having been there, that sometimes these things can become so much a part of our identity that we cannot let them go.
And
because they're like, who would I be if I don't have Lyme? Who would I be if I could go to work? A Lyme is awful, but the frightening prospect of having to change and do things differently and not having, in this example, Lyme, can be so scary to people that they unintentionally sabotage getting rid of the Lyme.
Yep, because
in
that
order
is
to stay sick. And
that's
I
who
don't,
they are.
Right. I'm not suggesting that they do it consciously.
Yeah.
But I believe I've been in a lot of Lyme communities where, you know, you go in there and you say, hey, I am Lyme free. Here's what I did.
Yep.
Crickets.
Yep.
It's like, wait, why don't you all want to know this? Like, it took 6 weeks. It didn't cost any money. Like, some of you people have had Lyme for 15 years. Like, why aren't you jumping on this? Crickets. And as I say, I say from experience that there was this little bit of me that had an identity crisis, because the bipolar or that depression, that way of thinking, had been with me for so long that I felt like I was getting part of me was taken away, and I had that kind of sense of loss over something bad, which is weird. But it took far longer for me to get over that than I thought it would. I thought it would all just be like, I don't know, bipolar, it's all sunshines and puppies and rainbows, and it wasn't. So that's why I say this, because I want people to maybe be prepared and think about what it's going to be like if they lose all that weight and they're no longer, you know, their identity.
It makes a big difference.
You know, whatever.
Because we hear that often, where especially with the people who go through the surgery to lose weight, and the people that have taken care of them for all this time no longer have to take care of them because they're not so large, and the relationship changes, and so it doesn't just affect you, it affects everybody else. Well, wait a minute, you don't need me anymore because you're not overweight. And of course, then with that person also, it's like, well, I'm not the fat, happy-go-lucky guy I used to be.
Right.
Well, you're still the happy-go-lucky guy.
Right.
But you're not the one that can make fun of your size and uses an excuse. And a little bit of you disappears, figuratively and literally.
That's actually an excellent point. That also I had people that left my life after I stopped having the symptoms of bipolar, either because they could either because I wasn't their project anymore,
Right.
because I wasn't broken, or they couldn't actually, or they didn't like sane Carrie.
Right.
They're, and so you have to be prepared
Mm-hmm.
if you're on any kind of health journey, whether it's chronic Lyme or obesity or mental health.
Yeah.
You have to be prepared, one, for a shift in your own identity, which you may need some help, crazy as it sounds, but you also almost certainly need to be prepared for a change in those around you, because either, oh, well, you're not broken anymore, I'll go find someone else to fix or help, or they are intimidated or challenged by the fact that you've taken control of your life, and they haven't been able to do that yet, or they don't like the healthy Corrie or the healthy Carrie, or because they're just, the dynamics change. So I say all this to not to put you off from continuing on your health journey, but to just let you know that I don't want people to be blindsided by those things that can be very real when you make a dramatic change to your health. Be that losing, 200 pounds or no longer having mental health issues, or, being sober. Like the same would be true of someone who is sober now. Or Lyme disease, any other chronic illness. I just want people to be aware that they may have to embrace things and let go of things. And let go of things that they didn't ever imagine that they would have to let go of, including part of their own identity and some of the people in their lives, some of whom they may really love. But you may have to let some people go.
I got an odd question for you. I'm not sure that I've ever heard anyone else ask you. What do you think, I guess this is completely opinion, the difference would have been had as a child, maybe you had your DNA test or epigenetics done and had a diet change early on in life compared to later on in life? Because we see kids dealing with all sorts of stuff today, and that having kids of my own made me think of that.
I have no doubt that my life would have been completely different. If and I'm a huge advocate for, if you give birth to a baby, do a blood test and test it for MTHFR. So they estimate that a third of the population has the MTHFR mutation. Of course, it doesn't express. So just because you have the mutation doesn't mean that you're going to get symptoms. So I think most people in the keto community know Danny Vega.
I was thinking of him when you said it doesn't always express.
So my friend, my brother from another mother, could not look more different to me if we tried. We both have genetically, it's kind of scary. There's lots of little bits of our DNA that are the same. Our MTHFR status, our COMT status, it's just like, but you look at us and it's just like, are you kidding me? Danny also has the same methylation status as I do. He has the same mutations on the same genes for MTHFR, but Danny doesn't experience any of the issues that can come with that. So people need to understand that just because you have a mutation doesn't mean that it's ever actually going to express itself. Me, like air expressing. In Danny, they're not. So it's just that mutation hasn't switched on in Danny, where it's switched on in me. And that can change. So, and I think there's things that can, so in trauma, physical trauma can switch gene mutations on or can change gene expressions, environment, toxins, food, all of those things. So, and I just think that mine was just switched on at a very young age. And I've just been struggling with, and of course, compounding. And because I was depressed and because I had bipolar, people treated me differently.
Mhm.
And I have very low self-esteem, and I never, I have a really high IQ,
Mhm.
but I never believed that I could go get, one of those jobs that people
Right.
with really high IQs get. So I never allowed myself to go do those things because
Mhm.
I didn't believe it about me. And I do put that all down to my stinky thinking,
Mhm.
which was caused by the bipolar depression.
Mhm.
And so I think that life would have been completely different had we known about methylation back then,
Right.
and I'd started on premethylated B vitamins, as a toddler. I think my whole life would have been completely different. And that's why I want every baby that's born
Yeah.
to have an MTHFR test, because the
Yep.
ramifications of that gene expression or that gene mutation expression are so far reaching.
Right.
If you go on the internet and type in MTHFR and pull up one of those things that it's implicated in,
Mhm.
it's mind-blowing. The
Mm.
number of things, the number of symptoms and diseases where MTHFR mutation is playing a part, it's scary.
Mm.
And so I think not only with the depression made a difference, because my parents treated me differently,
Yeah.
everyone at school treated me differently, I didn't make friends easily, I like all of that. So socially, it was very
made an
difficult.
impact. Yeah.
It made a huge impact. Emotionally, it made a huge impact. Mentally, I would not allow myself to go and be successful.
Mhm.
I always did jobs that not the kind of job that you would expect someone with my IQ to go
Sure.
do, because I didn't believe that I was good enough to go do
Right.
the big jobs.
Yeah.
So I held myself back. But also not just that, but then the toxic. So, I've had psoriasis since I was 11. I've had, and every year it seemed that I got more allergies. I became allergic to chalk dust, which impacted school. I became allergic to cats and dogs. I became allergic to grass. I just, and I think the toxic buildup over the years,
Yeah.
I doubt that I am ever going to fully detox
Right.
everything that's built up over the years. I don't think I'm ever going to get my liver to the state where it's just like able to function normally, because the toxic load that's built up over the years is just so huge.
Yeah.
And would I have migraines? Would I have started migraines at 16 if we'd known about my methylation status? Would I have had all these food sensitivities if we'd known about the methylation status? I don't think. I think my life would have been day and night different to how it's been.
And if anybody is listening to this and says, "Who's Danny Vega?" Episode number 8, go back and listen. And then, in a more direct relation to children in testing, I talked to Trent Holbert. He does epigenetics testing, and I asked him that. He goes, "I tested all my kids when they were born." And there's so much more that you can figure out other than just MTHFR. But he's like, I know because of their DNA, one kid's a morning person and the other one's not. He's like, it's straight out of their DNA. I know it.
Yep.
So there's so much you can learn. And in my case, now I have to save up for, 2 kids worth of that. But it's definitely going to be worth it, because you can help them so much, not just through their childhood, but through their entire lives, by knowing this is what's going to impact them for the rest of their lives.
So the 3 years that I actually did the calculation, 2013, 2014, 2015, which was the 3 years when I was diagnosed with bipolar 2, my medical expenses per year averaged $38,000.
Wow.
So that was for psychiatry, psychotherapy, medications for bipolar medications. $38,000 a year. Thereafter, I think my medical expenses have been around $1,000 a year since I So I've saved myself in 5 years, there's $200,000. So
Yeah.
for anyone who's like, I can't afford $99 for each kid to have them tested,
Yep.
the financial ramifications are huge.
Yep.
Huge, given that they estimate a third of the population have this mutation.
Yeah. Makes a
And
big-
even if it isn't expressing now, if you have it, it could flip on at any time.
Yep.
So Danny knows he has it. So if he starts getting these symptoms,
He knows.
already knows where to look.
Yep. He's already got it set and ready to go.
So I highly recommend
Yep.
that you get your children tested. Even okay, so it's $99.
It's worth every penny.
It's seriously, in the last 5 years, I've saved myself almost $200,000 in medical expenses as a direct result of my MTHFR.
And you're still here with us.
And I'm still
Had
here.
that not happened, you may not be here.
I wouldn't.
So that
I know I
that in and
wouldn't.
of itself, I mean, if you're worried about your kids in that regard too, it's worth $100.
And also keto.
Yeah.
It's not just the MTHFR, as we've talked about,
Mhm.
but also, the process of removing the sugar and removing the things that turn into sugar once you eat them,
Yep.
i.e. carbs, and bathing your brain in ketones, especially if you've been suffering for a long time. So
Yep.
you've got all that kind of healing to do. Super important. And
Mhm.
we hear, and I'm sure you have too, Corey, there's thousands and thousands of people whose depression has lifted
Yeah.
just through the keto, not anything to do with the,
Yep.
MTHFR or anything else, just keto.
Mhm.
They have found that their depression has either completely or mostly resolved.
Yep.
And that's the absence of sugars.
It is that simple, as much as people don't like to admit it. So
Right.
speaking of keto, let's take a few minutes and discuss how do you go from a pastry chef to a keto queen cook, a
Well-
recipe extraordinaire maker.
So how I fell in love with chocolate when I was like 3. I was virtually cooking when I came out. When I was born, I started cooking.
So you were born a depressed cook.
I was born a depressed cook.
Okay.
At by the age of 14, I had a wedding cake making business on the side.
Okay.
At 14 years old. Totally didn't think that I would ever amount to anything, but at 14 years old, I
Yeah.
I had a wedding cake business or a celebration cake business. And that was innate. That was just an innate. I just have a talent
Okay.
for that, and I love it. I was kind of the stork delivered me with this pastry chefing talent. And so when I was able, I went to the National Bakery School, which is part of South Bank University in London,
Mhm.
and got all the bits of paper. I was actually top student in the country for my graduating year.
Oh, nice.
So that was cool. But then when I got out into the real world, I didn't have enough money. I didn't have any backers to kind of open my own business. And I found that this may sound egotistical, but it is what it is. I found that my level of skill was not required in most places.
Right.
So I was continually being asked to work at a level that was below the standard I could
Yep.
do. And that was like, okay, then I don't
want to do it.
I'm not a half-assed person. I'm just not. So I'm either all in or I'm all out.
Yep.
So I kind of stepped away from doing it professionally and actually went into sales.
Okay.
And then after that, I did work for a while. I worked in Australia, in Perth, as a pastry chef. I worked in Canada as a pastry chef, and up in London. But I just decided that it was better for me mentally and emotionally
Mhm.
to come out of that. So I went and did business for a long while,
Mhm.
and eventually ended up at Microsoft. And it was in 2010 I started a food blog.
Mhm.
Just, random, living in Seattle, decided I was going to start a blog. And it started out, I was doing restaurant reviews. This was pre-low carb, pre-keto, pre-all the
Sure.
things. I just decided that I was going to write restaurant reviews. And so I started this thing called the Big Breakfast Adventure in Seattle. And every weekend, I would go every Friday, because I only worked 4 days a week.
Okay.
So Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I would pick a restaurant and I would go and have breakfast, and I'd photograph it and I'd write a blog post about it. And I actually, at one point, I was the number 2 food blog in the Western United States. I was the 16th most rated food blog in the world at one point, which was, a thing. Still can't work that out. But anyway, so and then 2 years later in 2012, I met a gentleman called Jonathan Baylor,
Mhm.
who does a kind of a low carb diet.
Okay.
He has his own name for it, but I did a podcast with him for several years, and that's when I realized that people needed help removing the grains and sugar out of their diet, because back in 2012 there was like no recipes. Everyone was like,
right,
we can't eat this diet because like we can't have anything that we're like, how do we do this? And so that it was 2012 that I started creating and posting very low carb, grain-free, sugar-free recipes. So that's how that started. And then a year later, people were begging me to write cookbooks. And so I started writing cookbooks just because people were begging me to. They were like, even if it's just all the recipes on your site put in a book, we'd buy it. Well, and I'm like, well, that doesn't feel right, but
it's free, but you'll pay for it.
I'll make new recipes and make you a cookbook. But everybody wanted cookbooks. So that was in 2013. I started writing cookbooks, and then and I was still working at Microsoft at the time, and I was working there up until 2017. And then in 2017, Microsoft's famous now for its layoffs like 3 times a year, just like, oh, see ya. So I was laid off in July 2017, along with 3,000 of my colleagues. And I took that as an opportunity to kind of, the universe kind of said, okay, you won't make the leap, so I'm going to push you. And took the Microsoft away, and I decided, I'd been at Microsoft a long time, so I had a good package, and I figured out I had 6 months to see if I could make my side gig, if I could make it sustainable, so that I could focus on helping people full time instead of part time. And three and a bit years later, I'm still here. Although in the process of that, I did move from Seattle to Connecticut.
I was going to say, with the cross country move, it mixed in there. Because
despite what people in Connecticut think, so much cheaper to live here. I mean, like, mind-blowingly cheaper to live here than in Seattle. So the move to Connecticut was because I was like, I can. It's not about what you make; it's about what you keep. So part of being able to support yourself is having lower outgoings. And so by moving from Seattle to Connecticut, I was able to drastically lower my outgoings, which meant I had a much better chance of being able to continue to focus on helping other people rather than working for someone else at a job just to pay bills. And I mean, just 3 and a bit years later, I'm still here.
That's good. I mean, just your house would cost you 10 times what you paid for it in Seattle compared to where you're at now. So that makes a big difference. So, well, I've had you for more than an hour, so we'll try to get this wrapped up so you can make some of those yummy recipes for everybody. So What is your favorite simple meal to make that's obviously a low-carb meal?
Lamb chops.
And I don't eat lamb. I've tried it a couple times, and it could be the way I've had it. But how do you like to cook it for those that are interested?
In a pan.
Just fry it and be done, basically.
Yeah. No, seriously, that's kind of my go-to thing. If that's probably not what you were expecting from a chef.
That's fine.
But seriously, I love lamb chops, and most lamb chops are come in at around 3/4 pound.
Okay.
So that's like lamb chop pan. That's if I've got like no time, which is most of the time I have no time.
Yeah.
So, and then of course I eat, if I'm developing recipes, writing cookbooks, doing masterclasses, I eat all the food that so this year I've been focused on building online masterclasses because I realized that, one, great recipes are hard to come by.
Yeah.
A lot of them out there aren't keto for a start.
Yep.
Then a lot of them don't actually work.
Mm-hmm.
And then most of the rest of them, even if they work, don't taste good. So, but I also realized that on top of that, there's a lot of people who grew up at a time where they never had to cook, or they never learned how to cook, or and people who just, they've been microwaving pizza or doing takeout because life is crazy and busy, and they don't have the kitchen skills, and it can be very scary for people. And they look at these recipes and they think, oh, there's no way I can do that. Yeah. So I've started making online masterclasses to help people be able to cook. So it's not just about having a great recipe that works and tastes good and is actually keto.
Yep. But you got to know how to do it.
You've got to know how to do it. And I think I have discovered there is a lot of people who are intimidated by cooking. And I think even people who work, and I know this because a lot of people who come into my masterclasses, they say, I was a good cook. I am a good cook, but this keto thing is totally different.
Yep.
And so there's even a lot of people who were really excellent, competent cooks before, who are kind of like,
it's something I've never done before.
Up a river with, in a canoe with no paddles, when it's particularly with baking, because the ingredients are different and nothing behaves the same, and the manufacturers make it complicated because there's 5 million different sugar-free substitutes now, and they all behave a bit differently, and so the landscape is forever getting muddied. So I eat a lot if I'm developing recipes for the blog or for the cookbooks or videoing recipes for the masterclasses. Then of course I eat all of that. But if it's just, there's no recipe development going on, or cookbooks or masterclasses, then my go-to meal is lamb chop.
That works. What's one simple tip you would have for somebody who is looking at the simple low carb lifestyle? They're already into it and they're overwhelmed, not sure what to do. Just one simple thing to help them along on their journey.
Bear in mind that the number one driver of ketosis is not more fat. It's absence of carbs. It can be very confusing out there. So just focus on eliminating the carbs. That, eating more fat is not necessarily going to get you into ketosis. What will get you into ketosis is absence of carbohydrates.
Because like most of us, there's still plenty of fat to be had, and it's all over your body.
Right. So that, I think, and also I get 2 tips.
Sure. You let me give a recipe, so I let you give 2 tips.
Do not assume that all the recipes are keto, work, or taste great, because the vast majority of them do not do at least one of those things, and most of them 3. So Pinterest is lovely, but
Be
the
careful.
vast majority of stuff out there will not help you.
Yeah. I found a lot of them.
You know, at the end
that
of the
way.
day, it doesn't matter how much people understand that they need to be on keto. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter how much they understand the science. If the food is not delicious, they're
Yep.
not going to stay on it.
Yeah.
If they don't, this is for most people. There are some people who would eat cardboard. If that was the right thing to do, they would eat cardboard 3 times a day and be perfectly happy.
Yep.
But for most people, if they'll do it for a short time, but then if they're not enjoying their food,
Yep.
they won't stick to it. So that's why my focus is forever going to be giving people easy recipes that are keto, that work, and that taste
Tastes
great.
good.
But they're also simple, right?
Yeah.
Because people either have forgotten how to cook, or they don't know how to cook in the keto environment, or they've never had to.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, my second tip would be assume that all the things you find randomly on Pinterest are not going to help you. Find a few good places where you know that from
What you're going to get is going to be good.
right.
So buying your cookbooks, for example,
Right.
following you online, joining your master classes, and
Yeah.
maybe a couple of other people out there like that.
And I've heard some people, like, when they find out I'm a pastry chef by trade, so I'm a professional. I've heard some people say that they assume that, they won't look at my recipes because they assume that because a chef did it, that
It's
they're going to
complex.
be complex or whatever. The absolute opposite is true.
Yep.
The absolute opposite is true. We will actually make things simpler and easier to understand than people who have not been trained in this.
Mm-hmm.
So don't be so you go find the actual chefs.
Yeah.
Your life will be easier, not harder.
Yeah.
And you should be less intimidated by a chef's recipes than you are by a non-professional's recipe.
Makes sense. So where can everybody find you if they want to buy your books, join a masterclass?
CarrieBrown.com.
That's quick and easy. And I bought my wife the ice cream cookbook, for those who are listening, for Christmas a year or two ago. And it gets used several times a year. Now, I recommend you actually read and do what it says, because, and I think I've said this before, but if not, forgive me, dear. Once or twice she goes, "Oh, I was supposed to refrigerate it and then freeze it." But live and learn. It still tasted good.
There is a masterclass for that now. So
maybe I know the Christmas present I need to.
There you go. Super, super fun. We had, and it literally takes you through every single recipe videos, the entire book in a masterclass. So if you love the Food Network, you will love these masterclasses. You will be an absolute rock star at making keto ice cream. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of people miss the most is ice cream. And this ice cream tastes like Ben & Jerry's or Haagen-Dazs. And it's good.
It is.
And it's the real thing.
We made some recently
the
for
masterclass is super fun.
It is. Yeah, they're great.
You also have personal access to me too. So if you're stuck with something or you have a question, then you get me.
That helps out a lot too, because sometimes you just look at it and go, "I'm not quite sure." It's easier to ask questions to the person who actually designed it.
Yep.
And we've made it several times and had it with friends and so forth, and nobody asks, "Is this?" No, they know it's because we brought it, and yet everybody, kids love it, and everybody loves it. So. Definitely worth the investment. Well, thank you, Carrie. I appreciate your time. I know everyone's going to enjoy this, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you, Corey.